Hello and welcome to EDHREC's Upping the Average, where we take a commander's average deck list as compiled by the data on EDHREC and make some quick swaps to it to help take it from a good start to a great one. I hope you like combat because this week the commander we're discussing makes the red zone twice as fun. Isshin, 2 heavens as 1 is indeed heavenly. Double attack triggers, even when our opponents attack? Amazing. Isshin immediately shot up to the #1 commander from the main Kamigawa Neon Dynasty set, commanding over 2,200 decks already. What a sight. Let's get right into it. We're going to snag Isshin's average deck from the average deck feature and import it to the Archidect deck building website. As always, any swaps we make must either keep the total price of the deck cost neutral or else help lower the overall price of the deck. Players who love Wolfguard decks are sure to love what Isshin is up to as well. Just look at these attack triggers. Look at these things. They're so pretty. They're so good. This average deck makes me so happy. It is such a tight list. It's got the full suite of mana rocks that I'd want in a Mardu deck for one thing. It's got all the right removal spells for another, and these payoffs look really exciting too. But before we get to any of the swaps, let's observe a few highlights and core cards. Most of Isshin's doubled triggers come in the form of token generation. Leonin Warleader makes tons of tokens, Grave Titan makes tons of tokens, Adeline makes tons of tokens. Then Brina or Karazakar proc so many times that we might not even be able to keep them in check, but that's what makes them so exciting. And twice the number of Atali triggers? Absolutely beautiful. And with how aggro this deck can be, we'll also need defensive combat triggers, and Isshin's amazing with those too. Revenge of Ravens and Marchesa's Decree mean that it will cost 2 life per creature for any opponent to attack us. Good luck getting through that. With an Emberwild captain, it's almost impossible for an opponent to hit us without losing like half of their remaining life. And importantly, a lot of this deck is pretty low to the ground, often swarming the board with a bunch of tokens, which means our payoffs are sublime. Twice as many Hellrider triggers is enormous. Twice as many Hero of Bladehold battle cries to pump up the whole team is terrific. And Fervent Charge skyrocketed in price when this commander released because it gives everyone +4 when we attack, which is so much damage that it hurts my brain. And I think that's probably as good a transition as any for us to get into the upgrades. We'll have 2 sections for this video. First, Isshin's standard swaps, and then a whole section to make the deck more budget-friendly. Let's kick it off. I honestly don't have that many swaps that I want to make to this list. The original average deck list is stacked, so the minor tweaks that we'll make are precisely that, minor. Going through this deck, there were like 20 cards that I wanted to add with cool attack triggers to double up, but what am I going to cut to make room for them? So many of these cards already in the list are so cool that there's no way I'm getting rid of them. Any cuts we make to this list have to be really granular. For instance, Ryu. There are plenty of folks building Isshin to be Samurai Tribal with a Voltron twist, but this average deck is not that type of strategy. We're planning on attacking with a lot of things, like a lot, so Ryu will leave us for greener pastures. Next, I want to examine some enchantments. Shiny Impetus is quite cute. I like 2 treasures as much as the next guy, and I have a goad deck that I love using this card in. I don't think it's an amazing card here, though. That creature probably won't survive too long enough for this to be as impactful as some other stuff that we could be doing with this card slot instead. Also, Cunning Rhetoric. I want to like this card, but sadly I just don't all that much. Even if we're nabbing 2 cards instead of just 1 card, it only triggers once per opponent, not per creature. I just don't think it's a true deterrent that actually keeps opponents off of our back. If we're being alpha striked, this doesn't protect us the way that our other defensive cards do protect us. Alright, my last 2 cuts are a little harder. I regret to inform you that my feelings about Cunning Rhetoric are similar to my feelings about Mangara here. Drawing 2 cards would be cool, it's true, and more card draw is always welcome, for sure. But I have a different card that I want to add later that I think will draw us a lot more cards than this, and it also won't cost $13, so sorry Mangara. And finally, here's my controversial cut. Let's talk about Aurelia. When it attacks the first time, we get an additional combat step. This deck loves to attack, so that sounds amazing. 1 additional combat step could genuinely be enough to carry us over the finish line in a great many cases, and as such, I think Aurelia is a perfectly respectable card to play. Here is my issue with it though. Isshin's ability doesn't work nicely with Aurelia's effect. Aurelia would get 2 triggers, but note the way that she's worded. She wouldn't untap our stuff in between each additional combat step. She'd untap them once and then give us 2 combat steps, but our tapped creatures wouldn't be able to attack in that second one. Aurelia would because she's got vigilance, but our other stuff would be out of luck. Again, one extra combat step might be more than enough to get you over the finish line for this deck, so power to you if you want to play Aurelia, because it's awesome. But the rules trickiness here just happens to bug me, and if I wanted extra combats, I think I would personally opt for something like a Relentless Assault, or at least some card that isn't $20 like the Aurelia is. Alright, those were my cuts. Now let's add. First things first, y'all see how many tokens we make, right? Like, look how many tokens. Holy, what in the world? This is so many tokens. And as such, I want a Cathar's Crusade in this deck yesterday. Attack with 1 Leonin War Leader, make 4 tokens, and suddenly we're hitting for like 28 damage or something? Yeah, that's incredible. Gimme, gimme. I also mentioned more card advantage, and that brings me to a particularly bizarre addition here, Sophina Spearsage Deserter, also known in a previous secret layer as Chief Jim Hopper. Sophina here gives us a clue token, which becomes 2 with Isshin, for every single creature we use to initiate an attack. That is so much value. Get it in here stat. Next up is my boy, my mono red buddy, Martin Stromgald. I play a Martin Stromgald deck, and I can tell you firsthand, people are not ready for how awesome he is. If he attacks with 5 other creatures, those 5 creatures get +5/+5. Only with our commander, instead it's +10. Holla flippin' Luya, he is a thing of beauty that needs to see more play in EDH in general, but especially in this deck. And last, but definitely not least, these 2 6-mana friends are also very underplayed. Calculating Lich makes each opponent who gets attacked lose 1 life per attacking creature, or with Isshin, that's 2 life. And this doesn't just count when we attack those opponents, so it's even political. This card melts life totals blisteringly fast. And Silverwing Squadron is kind of another Grave Titan, except it also flies, and it's also huge. Make 6 creatures every time it attacks? Music to my ears, these cards are rad. That's it for this version of the deck. Some simple upgrades to make Isshin just a little more deadly. You can find this list linked in the description below, but that was just part 1. Now let's move to part 2 and make this deck a little more budget friendly. Like I said before, there are a ton of amazing cards that I wanted to try and stuff into the deck, but that I couldn't quite make room for because the original list was so already tuned up and already optimized. But this isn't a commander that needs a really expensive deck list in order to function and perform well. So let's go lighter on the budget and make room for some of those other amazing cards too. Because whether you're playing a card that costs $25 or 25 cents, Isshin will still turn it into a total powerhouse. First things first, let's cut out any and all cards that hit above the $10 mark. Goldspan Dragon, Smothering Tithe, Hero of Bladehold, Teferi's Protection, Fervent Charge, just a whole bunch of cards. These swap outs will help cut off hundreds of dollars from the cost of the deck. They're great cards, obviously, but the budget options are also going to be rad as heck too. Before we get to those though, we have to acknowledge all of the lands that were cut since they were pretty expensive. We could replace them with basic lands, but personally I want to opt for some bounce lands. We're going to end up again with about 35 lands in this deck, which is a good number for a deck that tends to be this slim, but as the budget changes, I do personally feel a calling to make sure that the mana base also gives us a little more sustaining power when things aren't intensely optimized. In addition to those, I'm going to add in 3 other fun lands too. The red and white hideaway lands are pretty splendid here. Attacking with lots of creatures? Check. Making enemies lose life? Check. These are exciting ways to get just a little extra card advantage. It's perfect. And Path of Ancestry? That card's incredible too. We actually have a bunch of other humans in this deck, and I love a 3-color land that will give us extra benefits. Excellent stuff all around. In fact, speaking of humans, that takes us right to our additions. General's Enforcer, get your butt in here. This deck has like 7 legendary humans in it, including our commander. Heck yes, excellent protection and excellent attacker insurance when we want to swing into the red zone without risking our creatures' lives. In fact, speaking of insurance, I'm also going to opt for a Loyal Unicorn. Hear me out. We lost an Iroas in the budget culling, and that card does a whole lot to help us attack freely without losing our creatures. Loyal Unicorn is super budget friendly and it effectively helps us perform a lot of those same tasks, and that is really dang great when we want to get a whole bunch of attack triggers even against creatures that happen to be bigger than the ones we have in play. This card is like 25 cents, but it helps us attack with impunity, which is exactly what we want. After that, I want to get a flurry of fun attack triggers in here too, and red has some hilarious ones. Inferno Titan, Goblin Trap Runner, and Vengeful Ancestor. I love you, friends. Inferno Titan is a simple 6 damage spread around as we like it, which super helps clear out a bunch of blockers. Goblin Trap Runners makes an indeterminate number of goblins, but that's what makes it so fun. And Vengeful Ancestor, I actually love more and more as I think about it in this deck. On attack, we goad 2 creatures. Then, when they attack, the Vengeful will ping twice for each of them. Isshin modifies these triggers in such amazing ways. I like the fact that this is an attacker, I like the fact that it does damage, and I love using goad to keep multiple big baddies off of our backs. I won't let red have all the fun though, because Campaign of Vengeance also looks primo for our deck. Every time we initiate an attack, we'll drain 2 life per creature. That's aggro, and it buffers our life total all at once. That's amazing value. Actually, speaking of that, I want to increase our defenses just a little bit too. We have the Revenge of Ravens and a few of those types of effects already, but I'd like at least one more since our deck is technically less optimal than the original list. So what about Circle of Flame? It's kind of awesome. 2 damage to any creature that tries to hit us cuts out a lot of things that could have considered trying to rain on our parade. Oh, and since one of the cards we removed for budget reasons was a removal spell, let's swap in a Dire Tactics here too. Because again, we just have a ton of humans. Alright, 3 left. I'm kinda super into Triumphant Adventurer for this deck. It always attacks freely with no danger, and every time it does, we get to venture into the dungeon twice. That could add up pretty darn fast, and I especially like the way that it could land on turn 2 and curve right into our commander on turn 3. Up next, this is me being a little bit cheeky, but I like Fireflux Squad here. We make so many tokens, and this card will get 2 triggers, which means we can turn 2 of those tokens into real creatures. We polymorph our stuff on attack twice? Heck yeah! Those new creatures won't get their attack triggers since they enter already attacking, but I just love how much advantage this card can acquire for us, you know? I don't know what to tell you, this card is so funny to me that I just can't help but add it in here. And finally, I'm going to end with a supremely underrated common for Isshin decks, Rox Veteran. I'm actually kind of in awe about how much heat this card packs for this commander. Every time it attacks, we battle cry twice. Heck yeah, +2 for all our tokens is awesome, but it also taps down 2 enemy creatures too. Yeah, it pumps and it moves aside any problematic chump blockers. All that on just a common is simply amazing. Alright, there we go, an Isshin deck that's a little lighter and still a fighter. You can find a link to both deck lists in the description below with the cuts in the maybe board. I hope you had a heavenly time with Isshin 2 Heavens as 1, and if you have any other recommendations that you'd like to give for your fellow Mardu players, make sure you leave your suggestions in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching.